Alrighty. Well, welcome and thank you again for listening to this episode of the Perspectives on Leadership podcast, brought to you by Fire Engineering. My name is Steve Shaw, and I'm your host. I'm proud to be an assistant chief with Fort Lauderdale Fire Rescue. I'm also honored to be part of the Fire Engineering family as an author, as a presenter for FDIC, and as a contributor to the Fire Engineering Hump Day Hangouts. As much as I consider myself these days to be a student of the fire service, I find myself more being a student of leadership more than ever before. And I love talking about perspective. Perspective is my favorite thing to talk about. I'm fascinated by it. I'm intrigued on how each of us see things from so many different angles and how that viewpoint or that mindset can add to or take away from our ability to lead. The goal for this podcast continues to be pretty straightforward, to take a concept or a trait that we associate with leadership and take a deep dive down that rabbit hole. Our fire service is filled with amazing leaders, and each have their own perspectives on leadership. I want to pick their brains as much as possible and allow them to provide some tactical, immediately deployable takeaways as possible to the listener. Once again, I want to thank Fire Engineering and Chief Halton for giving me this platform so that I can do my part into passing it on to my brothers and sisters in the fire service. So, communication. We have more methods and mediums in which to communicate than we have ever had in the history of the known universe. We know what good communication looks like when we see it, whether it's through the teams and committees we work with or the incidents and disasters we respond to. We also know, especially over the last few years, what it has felt like for those normal ways of communicating, those tribal ways we do with the firehouses and what have you, stripped from us during that pandemic. And we were angry about that. We struggled with that. But now we have it back. We're done with the pandemic. We're back to somewhat of a normal stance. And here we are. All this considered, why do we still hear comments like, we don't communicate? You're not communicating with you. Or my favorite one, you know what the problem with this place is? Nobody communicates. I love that one. But we as a fire service continue to struggle with this. I continue to struggle with this. So several months ago, my boss and I spoke with Chief Billy Goldfeder, as well as a host of other influential fire service leaders on this topic to get their thoughts on the matter and as we prepared for a presentation a few months back. So several of the statements that Chief Goldfeder posed were just profound, and it left us wanting to continue that discussion, and that's where we are today here. So, as a quick introduction for Chief Goldfeder, I'm not going to go through his whole bio here, but I do want to list off some pertinent parts of his bio that are pertinent to this conversation on communication. So, Chief Goldfeder has been a firefighter since 1973. He's currently the deputy chief of fire over the Loveland-Symmes Fire Department in Southwest Ohio. He's been a chief fire officer since 1982 and has served as a fire chief in Ohio, Virginia, and Florida. Yay, Florida. He's an EFO and serves with several committees, or has served on several committees from the IASC to the National Fallen Firefighters Foundation, and he's a subject matter expert for the CDC and NIOSH in a variety of areas. I'm not going to list his numerous awards and commendations, but there's a few out there. Most recently in 2018, through FDIC, the Tom Brennan Lifetime Achievement Award, the Pennington School Alumni Achievement Award in 2019, and the Congressional Fire Service Institute Mason Langford Fire Service Leadership Award in 2021. He's always communicating with us in some way, shape, or form, whether it's as a contributor to the Fire Engineering or Firehouse magazines, through fireengineering.com, what have you, through the Close Calls website. There's so many different ways in which he's communicating with us. Um, I'm a big fan of the Pass It On series of books. I got mine right here, and it's a little bit notified, I guess. If you're watching this video, I got about 76,000 note tabs in here. I'm a big fan of that. I think that the Pass It On books are definitely something that put it into practice for us, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. He's also working on his fourth book, which I'm interested to hearing about through this conversation. At the end of the day, he's one of the guys that communicates with us in a variety of different ways, and that's powerful to us. On a personal note, I've got to know him over the past few years, and I like to pick his brain on different things. His no nonsense approach of telling us what we need to hear, whether we like it or not, is refreshing and needed. So there's before I give him the mic here, there's three things I thought about when I was preparing for this with Chief Goldfitter. First of all, is the Passing It On series. You know, now that it's in its third iteration, it provides us a constant reminder that information not shared is worthless. So I love the fact that it's forefront in the books, and it's telling us right there, frankly, pass that information on. I also am hoping to talk a little bit about his medical journey in the last couple years, with that vulnerability he's shown us in his battle with prostate cancer. It is November. It is Prostate Cancer Awareness Month. Having that run in my family, this was impactful and personal for me. So and it's a further wake up call for us to be aware of the risk and take action where we can. I'm hoping to dive into that a little bit. And the third thing is, I always hear this one message, one voice, one message mindset. I like to look at Chief Goldfeder and think, multiple messages through multiple voices, but consistently. Everybody I talk to in terms of communication or leadership, that word consistency, consistently, always comes up. And through his platforms such as the Secret List, through the IAFC, through Firefighter Close Calls, whatever have you, he's always communicating with us in some way, shape, or form. So I'm excited to see what channels work best. I'm excited to see what doesn't work so well, and to take a peek in what communication looks like from his viewpoint. So all that being said, Chief Goldfeder, thank you for agreeing to be here with me today as a guest. Thank you so much.
Pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me, Steve.
So I'm going to get right into it here. So first things first, we could talk about a variety of topics, and I love picking your brain. I love the conversations we've had, but I really want to dive into the one we recently had on communication. Some of the ideas and thoughts you brought up definitely gave me and my boss a ton to ponder. Before I get into the minutia, from your perspective, what are your general thoughts on communication within the fire service today?
It's exhausting. Um, it's exhausting because I think, as you were doing the introduction, and we did talk about, we've never lived in a time where there's so many ways to communicate, but yet the ways to communicate today have driven us away from verbal communication into finger communication, basically finger communication, emailing, things like that. And I think the more we've been brought down that road, the less we have the skills to verbally communicate. Human nature is such, and we're going to start back in the caveman days, right? Human nature is such is we don't really want to talk about something controversial, or we don't want to tell you you're ugly if you're ugly. We don't want to tell you you screwed up if you screwed up. We'd rather avoid that. That's very normal. And so that's an inert quality of human beings. By nature of being firefighters, we are generally good people. We want to do good. We're generally not conflict oriented. And therefore, we find ourselves promoting people up who may not have the slightest clue on how to communicate. The greatest role we have in this business, the most critical role, is the company officer. And we spend justifiably lots of time on how to direct your company, how to stretch lines, how to size up as a first due company. But we are woefully inadequate in teaching our people or even requiring them to learn before they take the test on how to deal with people. And that's your biggest issue. So take that generation now where we're at, where it's all about this and not about this, right? Um, and then add the human nature of, hey, I really don't want a conflict. That's why when there's a family fight, everybody goes away and lets those two people fight, and we're not going to participate or get engaged, right? um, so add that, and now add the generation and the generational differences, and I bring it up because it's important in communication, but there's always been generational differences. The World War II veterans thought me and my compadres were morons. And then the Vietnam vets came in the fire department and they thought the next generation was a bunch of morons. Well, it's natural for us in my generation. I'm 67, so I'm a little bit old in this job. But let's say the 50-year-old bosses, for them to not appreciate the millennials, not appreciate their lack of communication, not, you know what, not appreciate their interest in diversity or what pronouns they identify with and all that stuff. And look, I struggle with that. I do. I'm Billy. I mean, I don't know what the hell else I'm going to be. I'm who I am. But I have to force myself, as long as I'm on this job, to immerse myself into the younger generation. And I supervise two generations, okay, below me at my age. So I have to focus on what's best to communicating with them. Now, you'll get an old timer who'll say, I don't give a rat's ass what they, well, then you can't supervise them. And if you can't supervise them, you can't communicate with them. So you got to make a decision. Maybe it's time to put the papers in, or maybe it's time to lighten the hell up and take an interest in learning. I will tell you, when women started joining the fire service in the 80s, I was one of the first speakers at the Women in the Fire Service conference. Nervous as hell. I don't know what the hell I was going to, they wanted a firefighter survival program. And I did this in Fairfax County in like 1994, 93, when they were really getting started. But by just going to that, I got a better idea what's going on, how they think, how they feel. Doesn't mean I have to agree with everything. I don't. All right. But if they're going to come into what I saw at that time, my fire service, which clearly has now become our fire service, I got to take a minute. Believe it or not, I started to subscribe to some women's magazines, again, to just get an idea. And some of it was extreme and some of it was wonderful. And, what my extreme is, maybe you're normal, right? I mean, it just depends. But if you're going to take the check, and even if you're volunteer, if you're going to take the check or you're going to give the time and you want to be a fire officer, then you got to, just like you're going to go study the buildings on Main Street and prepare and do your size up and study and learn how you're going to attack that, you got to look at your people the same way. And that may mean if you got 5 on your shift, you may have to have 80% common communication and 20% unique to the individual. So I'm going to end right now where I started. It's exhausting. But if you're going to do this job, it's part of the job. And why the hell wouldn't you want to communicate? And why wouldn't you want to learn a little bit about that person or this person so you can better communicate with them? Because if we're communicating, you're going to have much better days.
So you know what, you said a couple things that I wrote down here that I thought were funny. I like finger communicating. I don't think I've ever heard it put that way before, but
My
it's the norm these
generation
days. Yeah.
way of finger communicating was different than today's. I mean, we ended a conversation with one finger, we were done.
I like that you say it's exhausting, because even from this seat over here, for a guy who's trying to communicate and trying to figure out the best ways and different tactics to communicate across the board, you have some wins. You have a lot of wins. You learn a lot, but it's like it's almost like you can never catch up to a certain extent. You're always going to make little mistakes. You're always going to learn from things, but it seems like it's never ending. There's always, it's like a muscle. You got to keep working at it to get better at it. But if you stop communicating or stop working at it, it just atrophies and you're going to get poorer at it. So I like what you're saying. It is exhausting, even just to try to do it the right way. I find myself doing the same thing where you take that deep breath going, man, this is tough.
Oh,
This is
hey,
tough.
I just brought in an employee who's really a good person, um, going through some stuff, but refusing to read off the same sheet of music. Well, you don't have a choice. You play in my band, you're going to read off the music.
Hmm.
And I'm an extremely tolerant boss, almost to a fault. And I'd say in my younger days, very much to a fault. These days, much less tolerant. I know how things need to go. And we're chatting with this employee, and the employee said to me, um, I talked to him about one of the drills that we had, and I said, "I've already heard you speak. I don't need to hear it again." Now, in my generation, I'd have been smacked and probably shunned. But this generation, they say what they want. Well, if you're going to say what you want, be prepared for my response back. Okay, so that's just sort of, I mean, at some point we got to let our guard down, not our guard, but we need to say what we feel. I mean, I'm not saying that as a boss you have to do everything scripted. Sometimes, I mean, you're entitled to say what you feel, but use caution. Make sure it matters. So when I have an employee who says, "Oh," and this person maybe got 3 years in the fire service, I've already heard this stuff, dude. You just opened up the gate, and I'm going to go from being a good communicative boss to a very dictatorial boss, and you're going to do exactly what I tell you. And you probably won't like that because your generation is not used to being told what to do. So you
Mm.
see what I'm doing here, Steve? It's almost like a controlled schizophrenia, that you have to sometimes be one way and sometimes be enough. It depends. Sometimes I pull up and I've got a dwelling with smoke coming out of one window. We're going to clearly take an offensive attack. We're going to send companies in and go do this. But if I pull up and I got fire blowing out every windows and half the building's collapsed, we're going to deck gun it and go home later. I have to size up every employee, and I know how to deal with each of them because they are a little bit different. Then I have to size up the particular situation. Now, I brought this employee in for this conversation, and I had two other supervisors in there with me. I was very prepared for a good conversation. What can we do? But a couple of those comments irked me. And at some point, I am allowed to say how I feel. So I don't want anybody thinking that in the first part of our conversation, you have to just bow down to these employees, especially the troublesome ones. No, you got to treat them fairly, treat them generally equally. And I say generally because not everybody is equal as far as why you're talking to them. And then sometimes you're like, you know what? I've tried everything. We have two choices here. You're going to do it my way, or maybe this is not the place for you to be. And I have zero problem doing either of those if you push me to that level. And let me throw one more because this is sort of in the same pool. The exhausting employee, the one that drains the organization, the one that, okay, again, same thing. At some point, there's an old saying, you'll spend 90% of your time on 10% of your employees. For a while, I'll do that. I am not making a career out of that. It's either going to be you or me, and I guarantee you it's going to be you if this comes to a head. Because my only motivation, and my record speaks for it, is to take care of the public and my firefighters to the best of my ability. And that's what I do. So either you're going to read off our music, you're going to maybe suggest some changes to the tunes. I'm always willing to hear what you got to say. But in the end, if we agree or I tell you this is the music, you're going to sing off that music. You do it our way.
I love that. I love that final statement. That wraps it up beautifully. I also like controlled schizophrenia. You know, my wife's a psychologist, so I'm going to go home and tell her that one. That's going to speak. That's going to speak to her. But I love sizing up each employee. That's tangible right there. And the analogy was great because you're right. They're all different. They all require a different tactic to get to them in terms of communication. That's a good one.
Oh,
So
yeah.
let me ask you this. Hmm?
So just real quick, let's do a quick scenario. So I'm a 67-year-old white guy, fairly open-minded, a little bit left of center in many of my views. I've got teenagers. I've got not teenagers. I do. I have teenage grandkids now. I have kids in their 30s and 40s, and then I'm in my 60s. So understand that. So let's take a look at that in a firehouse environment. It's 2022. I have employee A who is non-binary and does not identify as he or her. I have to figure that out and accept that. I have African American female. I have to have some understanding of what her particular needs are. And I'm only talking about a 5 or 10% need issue. The 90% is the rest of us. We're doing this together. But maybe she's Muslim and maybe 5 times a day she has to prayer. No one asks whether you like it or not. Just let them go do it. They're the shit. You're over there playing your stupid bullshit video games. If she wants to go pray, let her pray and honor that right she has, right? And then I've got the 50-year-old driver who sort of leans more toward the Archie Bunkerish environment. And then I've got the very openly LGBT employee, whether it's a male or female, who is very proud of who or she is. And we have to function within that environment. And again, no one asked whether you like LGBT people. No one asked if you don't like Black people. No one asked if you don't like Muslim. No one, it doesn't matter. You're charged with a job. And part of that is opening your mind a little bit to understand a little bit about these people. Because once you understand them, you can be able to communicate better.
Yes. Yes. hundred
Sorry to
percent.
cut you off, but
No, that's brilliant, and I love that just you went there. So the past few years have been kind of interesting. So is anything changed over the past years, like the COVID, for example? Obviously, that kind of hit us in certain ways. It kind of altered the way we communicate on a normal basis. Everything from having to wear masks, everything from having to separate, even at the firehouses, and up until today. But has anything changed, or was anything uncovered, in your opinion, in your perspective, over the last few years, especially with COVID, in terms of communication?
Well, it has nothing to do with it, but it has everything to do with it. Politically, we have found out how some of our brothers and sisters feel about certain things, and that create, in some cases, an uncomfortable environment. Uh, I did not experience that, but I do know many who have. And just the politics of COVID. I mean, never at a time in our country have we seen a disease become political, but we did. Okay, and we still see some of that. And we saw some places mandate masks, and we've seen other places that did mandate masks and had to fire employees, and now having to reinstate those employees. So that could, you bring somebody back who's pissed off that they lost 2 years of their job, and now they're going to get back pay, but you treated me like shit, and now I'm coming back in that environment. Yeah, it's a lot different. Um, so again, and I've said it now, and I'll say it to the end. The most critical role we have in the fire service is our company officer, bar none. Nothing happens without the company officer. You as a firefighter don't get the support you need without a good company officer. You as a chief don't get your goals and objectives accomplished without good company officers. So the key in there is the company officer. So if you're going through a situation in your firehouse where this one is right wing, this one is left wing, this one has no wings, and all the other shit we're dealing with, let's focus on stretching hose lines. Let's throw some ladders. Let's get off those discussions and let's get back to being firefighters. We're always complaining, I got to go on EMS runs and I got to do pub ed and all. Yeah, okay, you do. That's part of the job. Deal with it. And deal with a smile, because if you're going on an EMS run, pretend it's your grandma whose diaper you need to change. I mean, I don't know what else to tell anybody, right? And in our marketing of this job, we need to do a better job of explaining we also go on ambulance calls, just FYI. But back to this is the fact that we um, in dealing with these different groups and these different people, uh, if we have any sense that we're going to succeed, it has to happen at the company officer. And the company officer's job is, when the conversation is going to some negative stuff that has nothing to do with the job, all right, come on, let's go. We're going to lay some hose. Come on, we're going to work the hearse tool. Get everybody refocused on what they're at the firehouse for. So to answer your question, Steve, has COVID impacted communication? Sure, both on the job, nationally, politically, blah blah blah. And so again, I expect the company officer, let it go for a little bit, let it go for, and okay, let's go, we're done, and don't engage yourself in those discussions. Another thing company officers forget, you're not as much a part of the gang as you used to be. You may act like that, and you're going to get your ass bit. I guarantee it. Somebody's going to bite you. You now have to, as you, that first step as a lieutenant or captain, that first step is you are more now part of management. Okay. It doesn't mean you're going to agree with everything they say, but it means you're going to enforce everything they say. And it means you're going to explain everything they say, and you're going to get answers on everything they say. So, again, I don't want to go too far in this, but Steve, to answer your question, has COVID impacted communication? Yes. Is it fixable through through a company officer doing their job? Absolutely.
And you hit the nail on the head with the company officers. I think that I've made that statement as well in terms of their importance. The you can't override their importance of the firehouse. And whenever I'm teaching a company officer class, that's my, as Chief Halton always says, what's the term he already used? I'm unapologetic. I'm unapologetic when I say the same thing you just said in terms of the company officer's importance at the firehouse. So you're right on that in terms of their
Yeah.
responsibility in terms of communication. And COVID was a challenge for that because things were coming down the pike on a regular basis, and they had to, as you say, kind of interpret or translate that message so they understood, because this is what we're doing. Let me try to make sure, because I know you guys so well, you're my team, I know you. Let me translate this for you to understand the why that we're doing this.
and
Yeah.
and 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 just communicate, just talk. I mean, there's that human nature of, I don't want to enter into a conflicting situation. Well, that's where the organization then needs to be having both initial, and regular company officer training that's all about human skills.
Yeah, and talking to a lot of people, it seems like some departments do it well, where that's a norm, and some agencies struggle with that. They struggle with the regularity, the consistency, or even the having it at all. And that's probably one of the most important things we need to be focusing on.
Because
Yeah.
here we go again, because setting stuff up like that is exhausting. Okay. We have so much, and many departments are seeing cuts. Many departments are seeing, okay, chief, you have these tasks. Now you have 10 more tasks. Everybody's tired, right? And especially when you go from working in a firehouse to behind the desk like you are, it's a whole different world. And if Rhoda May says to you, I want quarterly company officer HR training, you've got budgetary issues, you've got scheduling issues, you got resistance, all that. It's like, right. Oh, let me check and see when I can retire. But we need quarterbacks who can run with the ball a long, long time with good stamina and who, yeah, okay, fine, you don't want to do it, but we're doing it anyway. That kind of stuff. We need people to run that ball, and it is exhausting. Go ahead.
So let me ask you this: Are there any, from your perspective, are there any communication constants that are timeless? In other words, that are just things that work regardless of generations, regardless of time frames. What parts of communication are timeless?
Gossip. We never fail there. You hear
Well, we're
something
good at
happen,
it too. We're good at it.
you hear something that happened to employee X, buddy, before employee X's spouse knows about it. We know about it. And it happened to the spouse, right? Um, I think probably if it's not in writing, it didn't happen. And I think probably the best timeless one that worked 100 years ago and still works today is things in writing. And that may be an electronic form, but something I can read again, absorb. Maybe there's an understanding about it. Maybe there's an example, but you can't minimize the ability to write. Now, where are we in teaching people how to write in a world where instead of in my text to you, I write you are, which means you're, right? So you see formal letters that are written as with freaking hashtags and shit, right? So I think as part of the process of learning to become a company officer, there's a writing class if you already don't have that with a college degree or something like that, or college courses. But I think the answer to your question is whether it's in an email, whether it's in a text, preferably in an email, more permanent, but in writing. Now, I'm not saying that replaces verbal communication. Rarely should anything in writing be done without it being uh, uh, preceded by a conversation. Um, that employee I talked to you about has some choices to make, and I need to hear back from them by the end of this week. Otherwise, either whether they say yes or they say no, they're going to be hearing back from me in writing, which will recap our conversation. And if the employee says yes, we'll clearly identify what my expectations are. So there's no question about it. Even if you have a verbal conversation with an employee with two witnesses in the room, it's still not valid, and it's not fair to the employee. I'm not talking all about management rights here. I'm talking about employee rights. The employee has a right to know exactly what you expect of them. And don't say, oh, here's your job description. That's bullshit. Okay. I mean, you got to have those. But if you've had problem with Bobby, non-boy or girl, you never know which Bobby I'm talking. See, I'm a very modern person. I'm trying my best here. If you have a problem with Bobby as your engineer on engine 9, you should talk to Bobby about that problem. And then, hey, Bobby, just an FYI, here's a link to a fire engineering video, or here's an article, but this covers that we talked about. If you have any questions again on the importance of priming your pump, please let me know. Otherwise, I expect us to have this under control. But again, here's a video, here's a something, do your job. That's what we're talking about. Do your job. That's supervising, and that's communicating. And you can't do one without the other.
That's huge. Yeah, and I think you hit a couple of things there, especially with the last part in terms of having the conversation, not it's almost like that normalization of deviance where you or not normalization of deviance per se, but more of like the crimes of commission versus crimes of omission. Committing a crime is one thing, but seeing something and going, man, maybe I'll not handle that today, and walking away from it, are you just as guilty? So having those
And that
conversations.
and that's many officers. We've all done that. We all still do it, and sometimes that's appropriate. You know what I'm saying? In other words, you really have to hone your skills through education and training, and then over time, your experiences add to that packet of what you bring to the table. But I've used discretion at times, and whether I say something right now, whether I say something later, or I just make a mental note. It wasn't a big deal. Like I haven't done this since 1982, but I'm riding the front seat of apparatus, and they forget to use their turn signal. Do I really need to do anything about that today? I mean, that falls into pick your battles.
Mm,
Now, the minute you feel uncomfortable about doing something, like I shouldn't feel uncomfortable about saying it if that bother, if that's a turn signal issue. But the real issue is if they fail to stop at the red light, they fail to put their seatbelt on. That's zero. Hey, listen,
mm,
and don't do this. I think it's a stupid rule, but you got to put your seatbelt on. If you don't have the chops, guts, heart, ability to defend the organization's policy, then you shouldn't be in the position you're in. Now, but Billy, I think some of the chief's policies are stupid. Well, if they're stupid, propose a better policy. But until then, I mean, have you ever gotten a ticket where the trooper goes, I think it's really dumb. You should be able to drive 90 miles an hour, but shit, I got to do it. No, they don't do that. They understand their job is to enforce the law. And as a company officer and a chief officer, your job is to enforce the law. Sometimes the trooper will give you a warning based upon discretion. You have the same discretion depending upon how serious that is.
I that hit a nerve because how many times do we see that where you see the company officer or whatever say, "Well, I don't agree with this, but you got to do this." And, if it was me, I wouldn't do it. But that's so JV. And to use Rob Ramirez from Coconut Creek's line, that's so JV. We're varsity level. Varsity level has the conversation, doesn't skirt the conversation, and doesn't use those kind of tactics. Well, listen, guys, this is what the fire chief wants. I guess you got to do it. No, 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 no. Your superpower as an officer, your superpower as a chief officer, especially mid management, is the ability to translate and basically give that message to the people you know so well in a way they can understand it. So that's
And
a
it's
nerve for
not,
me.
it's not easy. If it was easy, then you'd be personality deficit. You wouldn't have heart. You wouldn't have care, which is
100%.
what makes up being a firefighter, compassion, all that. So now you're going from wanting to do good, have lots of fun in the firehouse, be friends with everybody, to becoming a boss where you still have to do good. You still want to enjoy things in the firehouse, but now you're responsible. It's a big deal. And again, it keeps
It's a
coming
big
back
deal.
to the company officer. And one of the best programs out there, and there's a bunch of them, is the National Fire Academy's supervising officer program. I think that's what it's called, but maybe we'll look it up and you can link it to this podcast. But
Okay.
it takes time to get into. It's like a mini EFO, but it's all about the company officer. And it's a big, big deal. Give me great company officers. You can have the worst fire chief in the world and we'll probably do pretty well. Give me a great fire chief with horrendous company officers. You're a disaster waiting to happen.
Is it the managing officer program or the? I think that might be what it is.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Okay. Yeah, I'll definitely put that something in there later on. Um,
yeah.
So, a couple more things of communication, and I know you mentioned it before in terms of generational differences, and I think that can be probably its own talk on its own. But in terms of generational differences, give me your cliff notes. Because everybody talks about it, give me some cliff notes that are like nuggets in terms of communicating with the generations.
Well, the first is to learn them. You gotta size them up. I mean, you can't fight a fire in a building until you learn building construction. I mean, you can't do hazmat till you dealt with that. I think probably my most critical message here, and it was mentioned. I mentioned it in Pass It On 3. The greatest lesson I never learned, and I was never taught. The
Mm,
greatest lesson I was never taught, at least I don't remember it, and I don't ever remember any kind of program, is do what you're qualified to do and do not do what you're unqualified to do. So
Hmm.
this falls right into what we're talking about. We're sitting with an employee or something, okay? And here's the deal. Uh, I'm pretty good at single family dwellings, multifamily dwellings, strip malls. That's my bread and butter. That's what we do around here. You have a high rise fire, I'm calling Vinny Dunn on the phone. All right. I am woefully unqualified. Thankfully, I don't have high rise. If I did, I'd be studying like hell because I want to be the best chief to know what to do with that. Right. The same way I feel about single family and all that. What I just said was I recognized I'm unqualified and I called in an expert. All right. So keep that thought. You're riding on engine 15 and you pull up on a truck and the flames are orange, purple, blue, green, like you've never seen these kind of flames before. And there's some sort of lava running down the highway. You're going to do everything you can to minimize further damage from that, but you have no earthly idea what to do with that stuff. You're going to call in the hazmat team. All right. So those are two tactical examples I gave you. Now let's talk about people. You, by the very nature of who you are, and I'm talking to our entire audience, are probably friendly, cordial, like to have a good time, joke, helpful, all the stuff that describes a pretty typical firefighter. I'd say 90%. There's that 10%, but we already talked about those people and they're always in trouble. So the 90%, when you sit down and as a firefighter, it's all fun and games. It really is until the bells go off. When you sit down as an officer, everything changes. Not only do you have to manage the fun and games, but here's where we're going with this. When you were a firefighter and Bobby came to you and said he, him, her is having a problem with somebody at home, you would give advice because you're peer to peer. You're a firefighter. You'd say, "Oh, I did this with my wife, my husband, my partner, etc. This is what I recommend you do." When you become a company officer, this is a hazmat incident. This is a high rise fire. Cap, Lieutenant, my wife and I are not doing well. I think she's messing around on me. I think my husband's messing around on me. What do you recommend? Bobby, I am so sorry to hear what you're going through here. Let me give you some suggestions. Here's our peer support team. Here's our EAP. Here's a counselor. And as much as I'd like to give you advice, I don't have any to give. I'm doing pretty well in my home, but I really, because I care about you, I love you, brother, I love you, sister, whatever you want to call it. I want to get you to somebody who's neutral, who also, I mean, you talk to me or Lieutenant Smith or Captain Jones, you run the risk of us gossiping about it or saying to somebody, "Hey, you only heard this from me, don't share it," right? When I send you to a peer counselor, when I send you to somebody else, not only are you going to get a qualified hazmat technician, right? High rise technician, person technician, but you're also going to gain some confidentiality. That's a real life lesson that happened to me. I gave advice. This is many, many years ago. I gave advice to an employee, and it absolutely bit me in the ass. And although I did the right thing in my mind, still feel to this day, I was unqualified to provide the advice that I did. And that's the greatest lesson. If you're looking for a Cliff's Note, you're looking for one good nugget, I will save you so much time in HR, the chief's office, and everybody else by taking that advice. And how do you know you're qualified? You got something that says you're qualified. You got a degree in psychology. You got a degree you've been through a high rise course. You're a hazmat technician instructor. You're a psychologist. That you know, I took EMT in 1974. It was a Saturday, and I was an EMT by 5. Okay, that's how simple it was back then, right? But I've been watching for the last 49 years our people start IVs. I could start an IV tomorrow, but there's nothing says that I'm qualified to do it. Therefore, I don't do it. So, Steve, if I'm going to give you one thing, I beg your listeners and viewers, do what you're qualified to do, refer, strike a second alarm, call for backup. even if you're a lieutenant, you're dealing with a problem employee, call the battalion chief, call the captain. What do you think? A friend of mine recently had an employee say to him, I feel I'm being treated unfairly. Warning flag. What did he do? He called the department's EEOC officer and said, I need your help. Genius, genius. That's not to cause any problem, but hey, we're going to end up there anyway. Tell me what I should do. And he notified his battalion chief, notified his captain, and it worked out well. But
Mm.
who's ever heard a fire officer going to the EOC office to help solve a problem? Normally you go there with a check and you got to write a check to somebody because you screwed up, right? So that's my nugget, is do what you're certified and qualified to do. And when you're not, call for help, immediate, short-term, and long-term.
That's good. That's gold right there. I appreciate that. Um, Gonna veer off a little bit. In terms of, yeah, you had an interesting experience, to say the least, with your journey through prostate cancer recently, and you were very, very open about it. Very, you
Hold on,
put
I
it
have
out
to
there.
pay. I'll be right back. No, I'm just kidding.
But you know what you did, you know, very unselfishly, and with a lot of vulnerability, you put yourself out there. And you know, for a guy like me, with it running through my family, for a guy that values communication, it was eh, a good thing to see for a lot of us out there. But can you unpack that a little bit? In other words, what was your drive to put that out there, in terms of that journey?
So I appreciate your comments about communication. I've got 5 kids, 6 grandkids, and I struggle every day because each of them is a little different to communicate with. And I'm on my uh, I'm on my second marriage, approaching 20 years of my second marriage. Was married the first time 20 years, and I still get yelled at because I don't communicate well, right? And golly, I try, but geez, sometimes I just don't want to tell everybody everything. So why did I communicate about this? First of all, the whole prostate, just very quickly, I was diagnosed last October 8th, a year ago, with prostate cancer. And there's a good article in Firehouse magazine that you can just Google Goldfeder, my cancer, or this time my cancer, and you can read the article. I can send it to you. You can link it to this podcast if you want. And I know Bobby would not care that where it came from, that he'd want it shared. Seriously, he would. Bobby was one of my confidants in dealing with that. So I was given the gift of ability to communicate. When I first wrote my first articles in the 80s, I was told by a former editor of a magazine that was called American Fire Journal to quit writing because I don't have the ability. And everybody's got a story like that. I just kept writing, and Diane Feldman, and back then Bill from Fire Engineering, and now Bobby, of course, and all the other magazines that I'm privileged to write for, uh, like the way I write. And I love to write. I really do. And I love to share. So therefore, it was only natural for me to want to share this experience. I am not, there's certain parts of me that are extremely private, but overall, I'm not a very private person. I mean, if you follow me on social media, you know my grandkids' birthdays, you know my wife's birthdays, you know when my kid graduates, all that stuff. It's just, so that's just a natural thing to me. And I don't know where it came from because I was adopted. So I have no idea what my genetics are. And that ties right into the cancer story. The doctor will ask you, do you have any history in your family? And I don't know. I have no clue what my history is. So I was, the year before COVID, my doctor said my PSA is going up a little bit. Let's keep an eye on it. And at that point where the number was, it was low. I said, all right, we'll keep an eye on it. But then I missed my physical COVID year. Like many of us missed a lot during COVID years, tying back into your COVID conversation before. And then I went back, and my doctor said, it's up, but we can watch it. And I'm like, no, we're not watching anything. And so she gave me a referral to the Cincinnati Urology Group. They ran me through a bunch of tests. And I'll only say this once, there was no pain in any of this. It wasn't horrible pain or anything. It was just, just trying to save my life. I mean, that's really what we're talking about. And so they did the body scans, the bone scans, this scans, that scans, all that kind of stuff. and they say you definitely have cancer. And in the world of cancer, there's a number of gauges, but I'm going to share two gauges with you. One is, of course, what stage is your cancer, and we all know what that means. You know, stage 4 is really bad. Stage 1 is, hey man, maybe it's manageable. That's not really all true. Stage 4 people survive well today in many cases. But in the world of prostate cancer, the uh, number you want to watch for is your Gleason score, like Jackie Gleason, your Gleason score. And your Gleason score is the miles per hour of your cancer. How fast is it going? So and I'm using layman's terms. I'm not a doctor, nothing like that. But if in the world of cancer, where is it today? That's your stage. How fast is it moving? How aggressive? That's your Gleason score. Mine was over a 9 and 10's a death sentence. So that was kind of, like same eyebrows you just raised. So 1 is fine. Anything below 6 is manageable. 6 and above is concerning. And a 9, 9.5, where I was, is pretty bad. And actually, when I talked to Bobby about it, he goes, whoa. And I remember being angry at him that night after he said that to me, because he scared the hell out of me. It was just one of those things, and obviously I was very appreciative, but not only is my glass half full, my glass is overflowing all the time. I don't allow a whole lot of, as you know, I don't allow a whole lot of negative into my life. And I'll push you out as quickly as I can, and I'll come back at you if I can. So back to the ability to communicate, I just decided I wanted to write about it. Now, I did not share this story with my friends or family until about 2 weeks before my surgery. I did that because I've got my kids are all, in their 30s, and they're all working, they all have families, they have all that kind of stuff, and I don't want to burden them with that. I don't want to worry them. So I let my family know about 2 weeks before. I sat and talked to my boss about 3 weeks before, who, those of you who know my boss, Uber, we have a phenomenal relationship. And people say, how do you get along with him? I said, 95% of the time we get along perfectly and agree every time. And we agree on everything. And the other 5%, he's right. So that's a good tip for those of you coming to the ladder. Anyway, so I decided to share the story. And the story goes as follows. They identified that I had the cancer. They identified that it needed to be dealt with. I wanted a second opinion, and the doctor was absolutely fine with that. I had to make a decision whether I wanted to go with radiation or I wanted surgery. I reached out to the Firefighter Cancer Support Network, and since then I've gone through their training as a peer support as well now. So we need to share that, right? And they walked me through a process where Terry and I made the decision that I absolutely wanted to have surgery, where walking into the process, I wanted radiation. So it's interesting how with a little bit of education and understanding, you change your way. When I was a volunteer firefighter in the 70s in Long Island, a very dear friend of mine, who remains a very dear friend of mine to this day, Johnny Orens, he now is a very prominent physician and department head and full professor at Johns Hopkins University, or at Johns Hopkins Hospital. So I reached out to Johnny and I said, hey, dude, and he had my doctor send him his information. He shared it with his team there. And he called me the next day and he said, when is your appointment with your doctor? I said, actually Monday. This was on a Sunday. He said, they're going to ask you when you want your surgery. You tell them you want it tomorrow. That was another poignant moment that we need to move on this. So basically, my cancer was on the prostate walls. Let me see where it's basically pushing to get out. And what we didn't want is that. Okay. Had my surgery. I was out for about 8-9 hours. It was all robotic, all managed. The doctors on one side of the room and the nurses are with me at the other, watching the robot do its thing. They went in, they did the removal, they took the prostate out. They do 5 little holes in my abdomen. You couldn't find them now if you tried. That's how small the incisions were. I still look really good in my bathing suit and stuff. And so That was it until. So that was it. I got home, and there's an until here. I got home. The first week was a little rough. It's, you had surgery, so you're going to have some issues. They inserted a catheter into me, so I didn't have to worry about peeing. It took care of itself. And then after that, uh, you do have some control issues. I had to wear a Depends for a couple months. No major accidents, but there was some dribble issues here and there. And then I started wearing a pad after that, and now I don't. Now I don't wear anything. Now I don't have to wear any pads or diapers or anything like that. It's well under control. I don't have any accidents. And sexual function, which is what all the guys are wondering who are listening to this, is not what it was, but it certainly it works. It's just different. And I'll trade that for cancer anytime. So the until is this. Last March, I started to get a pain and I started to get a fever. The fever I thought was COVID. I got tested a few times, nothing. I wrote it off to the flu, but the pain in my abdomen was started running down my leg, and my leg was starting to hurt. I thought it was because I was sitting around. I walk every day. I thought it was that I wasn't out exercising, and that from sciatic or something. It didn't get any better. The pain, I was limping, and I went back to the doctor and had some tests done. And again, I reached out to Johnny and I sent him the test. He says, "Go to the ER right now." And what had happened was there was a little infection from where my surgery was, and it's going to look. It can happen. It's no reason to not get your PSA checked. It's no reason to not get the digital exam. Digital exam when they stick a finger up your butt and check your prostate. Don't stop doing that. You need to do that, and you need the blood test. You need both. Don't do one or the other. Okay. Listen, most of you wonder what it's like to get a finger in your butt anyway. So just let the professional do it. All right. There you go. So I completely destroyed your show for you.
It's going to take a lot of editing.
You know what? This is life. This is life. And you got to take care of yourself. You got to minimize your exposure, but you are at great risk as a firefighter to get prostate cancer as a male firefighter. So you want to get checked. I got the infection. I was in the hospital for 10 days, double IVs. I had a very serious infection. And again, it's like you don't want to rekindle, but once in a while it's going to happen. You do your best to not. So I'm no anger with the doctors, nothing like that. I'm still here. I'm still pumping along and I'm back to normal. So that's my story. It can be as in depth or as short as you want it to be, but that's my story. And I share it because it's an opportunity. Just like I share if something happened to a firefighter in Timbuktu, and if I send it to you, maybe you'll read that secret list today. We have hundreds of thousands of people that receive the secret list. So, and I know I average about 50-50 on who's going to open the email or not. And it's never the same people. It just depends who's available that day. So we continually throw stuff short, sweet, to the point with links. And that's why I communicate, because it's a chance. I wish there's plenty of cases I can give you in my life where I wish somebody had given me some lessons prior to things happening.
Fair enough. And I do have the sticker from the 40 Plus Fire website, and it's nice. It's wonderful that you put that together. I'm definitely a subscriber. I keep my eyes on it just because of my family history, but just
real
some
quick, Steve, we didn't mention it. 40plusfire.com is a website I created just specifically to educate firefighters on prostate cancer. So if you do nothing else, go to www.40plusfire.com. Check it out. There's actually a document you can download to bring to your doctor that explains you're a firefighter, what they should be looking for, et cetera, et cetera. And you can also go to that site and get some free stickers as well, courtesy of LifeScan Wellness.
Definitely appreciate it. And again, as we're coming close to the end of our conversation, I just want to make sure I thank you for the communication on that. That was it was strong to see you put that out there, and it was much appreciated by myself and a lot of people that I've spoken with since then. So
good.
Thank you for your ability to be vulnerable. Let's just put it that way. So In terms of, this is one of my favorite questions I ask. It seems like I've enjoyed this platform for a little bit now, and this is one of my favorite questions when I ask whoever the guest is. But in terms of the fire service, in terms of beyond communication, even, does anything keep you up at night in terms of concerns in the fire service today? What keeps you up at night, if anything?
Yeah, recruitment and retention,
Mm,
if it's a national issue. Let me give you a positive first. We've worked very hard in our region to operate as one department operationally, but yet we have different fire departments. You know what I'm saying? And Used to be I'd have to get to a fire, or our chiefs would have to get to a fire and straighten things out and take command and do all that. I'm very proud that we don't do that much anymore. When we get there, it's more of a what do you need? So I wanted to provide a
mm,
positive of what doesn't keep me up at night anymore. Now, we're still turning out, we're still responding and all that stuff, but we've done an amazing job. And that's due to the chiefs in our region. It's about an 8 or 10 department area who've really made a difference in investing in our company officers and our shift commanders. What keeps me up at night is the not the concern about recruitment and retention in the career service and the currently failing volunteer service around our nation. It doesn't mean every department, but it is not uncommon at all these days to hear a volunteer fire department get alerted and toned out and get toned out and get toned out and get toned out and nobody shows up. Or it's a long time. Or it's a bunch of high school kids with a retiree driving the truck. It's not what it needs to be, and it's not what it should be. Um, and then on the career side, we're seeing far less people applying for this job. And there's a lot of people doing a lot of research. I just was privileged to be part of Dr. Lori Moore's U.S. Fire Administrator Summit we had in D.C., where she invited a select group of leaders from around the country to start solving these problems. I couldn't tell you what the fire service is going to look like from 10 years now if I try. I'd
mm.
like it to look like what I know, but I don't know that I have the brain power to figure that out. I mean, is it, this is going to, you will lose viewers on this comment. Is it that we consider the issue of all the immigrants wanting to come to our country, like the German and the Irish and them did years ago, and they took the civil service jobs because nobody else wanted those jobs years ago? And that's how you got the Irish as firefighters and cops and stuff back then. Nobody else wanted those jobs. Do we start looking at that as a solution? That the modern immigrants of today that are trying desperately to come into our nation, that we welcome those people, we appropriately figure out who the good ones are and the bad ones are. And someone's going to say, well, you're never going to find all the bad ones. And I would say, we don't do that today. We let bad ones through. So it doesn't,
Mm.
not a big deal. But can you imagine you're in a country where you make $1 a week, you live in a hut, you're dirt poor, and you come to America and you can become a firefighter? You talk about the American dream. So I don't know. I mean, it's a little wacky, but I don't know what else we're going to do. I know that looking at our youth is a big deal. Creating high school programs is a big deal. There's lots of good ideas out there.
Mm.
I've held some webinars with Lexipol and with Fire Rescue One and others. We've had these conversations. It's a tough nut. And I beg the chiefs, don't change your standards. Now, and when I talk about standards, I'm not talking about, oh, they can't reach the hose cross lay. Then lower the damn cross lay. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about they can't reach the ladders up there. Then lower your damn ladders. I'm talking about the mental capability, the physical capability, the heart, the personality to be a firefighter. That, those cannot be changed. We need to find the right people. But what keeps me up at night is that. Part two, what keeps me up at night is the lack of repetitive learning. I am still seeing firefighters covered with soot, breathing smoke, and I don't mean just a little bit. I mean stupid shit that, and not understanding this. And that's a failure of the organization leadership, and that's a failure of the company officer. Um, Look, no one watching your podcast today does not know a firefighter that has cancer or had cancer. So why wouldn't you think about that? So I'm starting to see some stupid old habits. Somebody posted a picture yesterday on social media that had a firefighter wearing rubber pull-up boots and a short coat at a fire. And I'm going to write a story about it. But my story is going to be about John Drennan, who was an FDNY captain who lived with critically severe burns for 30 days before he finally died. And that is what caused the FDNY to go to bunker gear. So, how in the hell are we going back to doing stupid crap like that when men like John Drennan, Vina Drennan's husband, that's the same person we're talking about, some of you know Vina, um, who sacrificed, and I don't mean they died instantly, which is what we all hope if that's going to happen. John lived consciously with horrible burns and then died after 30 days after being roasted in that fire. How dare you wear rubber pull-up boots and a coat, exposing yourself when men like him went through what they did so we could have bunker gear today? That's the kind of stuff that irks me. And I don't often respond in social media because only certain people are going to read that. I'll take your stupid shit and I'll put it in my website or I'll put it in an article and will really make you famous because it's inexcusable. We have bunker gear because of that. We have SCBAs so we could get in and save people. We have modern stuff. Use the stuff.
And I'm glad you went there. And I think that starting with the recruitment and retention, we're all dealing with that. And it's who would have ever thought we would be where we're at with this? Who would have ever thought we'd have a problem? I mean, with lines of 200, 300, 400 or more for one, two, three spots in the past to where we are now.
Well,
And I'm
Steve,
glad.
who would have ever thought that Dunkin' Donuts would pay $18 an hour?
Yeah, yeah, you ain't lying. You ain't
It's
lying.
a heck of a societal issue, and it's good thing Dr. Lori brought a bunch of brains together, but I don't know one person who's how to solve it. We're going to have to work together and give chiefs ideas on how to do recruitment.
Glad we're all having this conversation out loud so everybody's hearing it. To know one, it is a problem that we're all aware of. And two, we're actively trying to figure out. You guys like you and everybody else above you at that level are actively trying to figure it out. And that's at least heartening, I guess. It's a
Well,
good thing.
part two of that is the retention, and the retention is really twofold. One, how we treat our people, and we may need to treat them a little differently than we treated my generation. Just accept that. We just may need to do that.
Sure,
Okay.
sure.
And doesn't mean we're going to coddle people, doesn't mean we're going to allow inappropriate behavior. It means we just need to treat them differently. But we also, and this is speaking to any department that responds on EMS runs, we are the last people standing, the last man standing, right? The old term in our nation's healthcare. It's a disaster. We are going on so many unnecessary calls. I don't mean we, I mean our nation's fire service. We have medic units sitting at the hospital for 5, 6, 7, 8 hours because the patients are not being accepted. And our social services are failed miserably. So Mrs. Smith, in honor of Bruno, in memory of him, so Mrs. Smith, who continually falls, instead of getting her to a place that solves that problem, she calls us 5, 6 times a week. And we had no problem taking care of Mrs. Smith before, but we're getting tired of taking care of Mrs. Smith where we shouldn't necessarily have to do that. So that's kind of part two. There's the recruitment issue, but then there's the retention issue. One, how we treat our people, and we may need to look at how we treat them. And secondly, the abuse that fire rescue and EMS is taking in our nation. It's happening everywhere.
Right. And as one of the people trying to not only establish, but to keep the momentum going for a community paramedicine program or mobile integrated healthcare program, I'm feeling those, we are feeling those initial struggles to get it going. But the reason we're doing it is for the reasons you just mentioned. Not everybody needs a trip to the hospital. It's the evolution that we're trying to manage through. And it's going to take time to get it to where it's going to be normal in our fire service, to where that's part of what we do, but in a different way. So yeah, then the struggles are going to be there, but we gotta pass through that red tape at some point, and we gotta have the cheerleaders to bring us into the next level. So,
And when we
um,
recruit, we got to tell people we do this.
oh yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I was just talking to our recruits a couple weeks ago, and I made sure they understand that, hey, listen, you understand that whatever you're experiencing now, wherever you walk into, will not be the same 10, 20, 30 years from now. And that's just going to happen. So make sure you understand that the idea of this is not what I signed up for, that ain't going to fly. Change is inevitable. It's going to change. And change is a good thing, but it's going to change.
Yeah, and like we talked about volunteer fire departments, the days of the whistle blowing and the pager beeping are over. It's time to, if you want to volunteer to do a duty crew once a month or once a week in your firehouse. I mean, if we remember why we were formed to help our neighbors in the volunteer side, then you need to adjust so you can serve your neighbors better because it's not a rural community, now you're suburban. And if it's a career department, the leadership of the career department has got to train the officers to deal with the newer generation that's coming in. And they need to look at a proper recruitment program so everybody really understands what this job is. We do go to fires, but we do a whole lot more. We got to make sure you understand that too.
So last question I have for you. I'm enjoying like I said, this platform, and I've had some great conversations so far. I love that we've really focused on communication. I think we did a decent job with that, and whoever's listening, I think is getting a lot out of this. I know even as usual, I have as well. I'm getting a lot out of this as well. That's just what I do. But in terms of what people want to hear out there in terms of leadership, what are some other ideas? What are, in your opinion, from your perspective, what other traits, what other focusing factors on leadership should like I focus on in future podcasts? What comes to your mind first?
Try to identify a mentor, whether you know the person or whether you read their books or you follow their podcasts. In other words, I I go to classes at FDIC and I teach at FDIC. I go to classes at Fires. I take online training. In my department, I have to quarterly be at the drill tower and lead drills because that's what I do at Fires. Like our chiefs are required to go through continuing education. Um, so uh, I think I identify where your weak points are. I mean, this is classic stuff. I mean, you'll find a chief here. I'm sometimes better with examples and analogies. Um, the chief will show up at a fire and take command, but hadn't been in training in 10 years. Go away or go talk to the media. You're not drilling with us. And I don't mean for the chief to go down and throw ladders and pull hoses. I don't do that. You don't want me working your hose tool. You don't want me stretching hose. That's not my job. I'm not, now I help pack hose, but I'm not arrogant. I'm not being arrogant, but you'll say, oh, I go out there and train my troops. Dumb, wasting your time. Give me that hose line. What are you, crazy? That's not your job, right? But if you're going to have a multi-company drill, why aren't we making the battalion chiefs down there as well instead of the drill master running the drill? Let the drill master sit in the front seat of the buggy and let the battalion chief run the drill. In other words, identify where your weak and your most uncomfortable areas are and do that. Now, I will tell you this. So like tomorrow night, or Thursday. Yeah, tomorrow night I got 2 drills I have to run. One's at 4 p.m., one's at 7 p.m. because we do night drills once in a while too, right? I am more nervous when we're doing the live fire drills than I am going to a real fire because I have no idea what the damn instructors are going to throw at me. And most of the time they want to screw with me. So it's challenging. Whereas at a fire, I get my rhythm a little bit better and I know what's real and what's not, right? And that kind of thing. But sharpen your pencil, man. Look, I mean, when's the last time you checked your vehicle to make sure you got all the sharpened pencils and your radios are in the right channel and they're charged? In other words, I'll challenge any chief in the country right now. You go look at my buggy in my garage right here. I guarantee you I'm as equipped or better equipped than anybody. But I don't have lengths of hose. I don't have I have tools to support you. to support my troops. I've got extra batteries. I've got extra portables. I've got markers. I've got all the things that my troops expect me to do. So I don't know if I'm going in the right direction of what you asked, Steve, but I just think it's important to identify what you need work on or what you do and train on that. Uh, it's a big deal. Does that cover that?
No, it does in various ways in terms of you mentioned mentor in the beginning and kind of identifying where you're uncomfortable and it's almost like an internal gap analysis, trying to figure out where your areas of uncomfortable are and then working on those, but also knowing your role. And I think you said that before. Don't do what you're don't do what you're qualified to do. I think you mentioned that earlier as
Ties
well.
back to that again. Yeah, but I mean, look at your own organization. And I'm guilty of this years ago before I grasped onto this concept. And that is that I can't sit in my office 365 days a year and go to fires every other week and take command and supervise people that I didn't attend training with. It's like your football coach shows up on Sunday and they never drill with the team. They never practice with the team. What kind of coach is that going to be? But I don't want the coach wearing football gear on the field. I want the coach coaching in their
Mm,
role. Same thing in the fire service.
that's a great analogy. So we're wrapping up here, but I just wanted to kind of go through some of these notes ahead because the idea that we're talking about communication, this was rich, and I appreciate your time with this once again. I think that I love that we started off with the idea that communication is exhausting. I think that was a very poignant statement. I think it's absolutely true. I think that when you said that, whoever's listening to this is like, damn, yeah, the guy's right. It's absolutely exhausting to try to communicate, knowing that it's a continual thing. It's gonna be a continual struggle, but you got to keep doing it. I love that word exhausting. You mentioned it like so many of us do that the fire officers are that most influential and important member of the firehouse for so many reasons, but specifically in terms of communication. And I had mentioned that I always like to think of them as interpreters, think of them as translators, taking that message and translating it to those people that they work with because we're trying to
And
use that superpower. They know them so well. Great. We love that you know your people. Thus, take that message and translate it to the proper way so they can understand what you're trying to tell them. We went through things. I loved some of these things where don't do what do what you're qualified to do. And I think there's a lot to unpack there. And I'm glad you brought that. You hit a nerve when you earlier said when you have those company officers or whoever just saying, "Well, this is what the fire chief wants. Go ahead and do it," and how that's just a cop out. That's the varsity level players, the true officers are going to take that message and try to make sure that people understand. They give them the why of what's coming down the pike.
don't
Um,
leave my office if you have questions or you can't support what we're doing. Now, we may
love it.
reach a point where we're not going to all agree. And that's when you become like the state trooper. You become ambivalent whether or not the speed limit is 80 or the speed limit is 50. You enforce that speed limit without comment.
Yeah. And the last things, first of all, and I do appreciate your vulnerability and talking about your journey with prostate cancer. I think that was very powerful, and I do appreciate that. I know your listeners will as well. And I like the fact that you were also vulnerable about talking about keeps you up at night. But not only are you worried about things like retention or recruitment, but you're actively, once again, trying to navigate through it. And it's nice that guys like you and Dr. Morel and the people at those groups are trying their best to figure it out, not just watch it go by, because we're all in that same boat. So, um, as we wrap up here, Chief, is there any like final words, final like, in terms of communication or whatever, final words of wisdom or advice from the listeners?
So, if this is the greatest job of the world, why are we complaining so much? And sometimes we need a little reminder that this actually is a really cool job. It's not what you dreamed about. It's not backdraft. It's not ladder 49 or Chicago fire, but it really is. I mean, for the career side, you work one day on and take 97 days off or whatever hell schedule you're on, right? And you get a chance to help people when they're having their worst moment. If it doesn't match your needs anymore, then move on. Just move on. If you're unhappy, the other side of that is company officers. If you identify that problem, try and solve that problem. But at a point, you sometimes have to say or work through your system and say, does this person want to be here? Because it's critical we function as a team. And I don't mean that just to throw the word team out there, but we've got to be in sync with each other. We've got to have some level of like amongst each other. So either you're in or out. I'm pretty blessed. I've been in since the beginning of this whole thing started. I love what I do. I'm to an extreme, but I love this. I love the chance to help, and that's what we do here. It's going to change as time goes on. Our job's going to change as it always has. But the final word of wisdom is if you're not loving it, figure out what you can do to fall back in love. If not, move on.
Love it. That's a great way to end this conversation, this dialogue. And I appreciate that. We appreciate that. So as we end here, and I think that if somebody wanted to get a hold of you, I think that there's no way they don't know how to at this point. But in terms of maybe how to get a hold of you, what's the best way? And then is there any project that you're working on? I think you said there's another book coming out. Is that
Yeah.
right?
I'll tell you real quick about that. First of all, reach me is just through Firefighter Close Calls. Just go
Gotcha.
to firefighterclosecalls.com, contact us and the crew. And we have a volunteer crew of about 12 guys that donate their time to run the website with me and Gordon. So they're phenomenal. So you can do that. The book I'm working on, and I know we're short on time, is a book called 30 Fires You Must Know. It came from Frank Lieb and I talking about a crew we were talking to who knew nothing about what the word hackensack meant. And I'm not going to tell anybody on your podcast, but what hackensack fire means and why we need to know that. So Google that and you'll figure it out. And our point was this generation, we've missed something in so many ways to communicate. How does somebody not know about the Vandalia Avenue fire? That does not know about the Charleston fire, that does not know about the Hackensack fire. So that's what this book is. It's Frank Lieb and I are both writing it together. Frank's chief of training in New York City, and we have a lot of common interests. And so we said, hey, let's do this. It's going to be kind of cool. I'm going to write the introduction to each chapter. The chapter is going to be written by somebody who was there or who had direct knowledge of the incident. So you're getting firsthand account. Frank is going to create a little lesson plan after each one so you can teach that fire to your crew. And then there's going to be a QR code at the end of each chapter that you can QR. See, I'm like really modern and stuff, right? You can
Obviously.
you can QR and you'll get the report, you'll get videos and everything else. It's called 30 Fires You Must Know, and it will be announced sometime in 2023.
That is awesome. I'm excited about that one. All right. Well, Chief, thank you for your time. Much appreciated. Thank you for having this conversation with me. Thank you once again to Fire Engineering and Chief Holton for allowing me this podcast. And everybody have a wonderful day. We'll see you next month. Thank you,
A
guys.
pleasure. Take care. Thanks for what you're doing, Steve.